My name's Hugh Jorgensen. It's my honour and pleasure to be here on behalf of Green Cross Australia. We're probably one of the newer branches of Green Cross International, but no less significant. So if I can just load up this, here we go. So, firstly, I'd just like to thank the Griffith University Climate Change and Adaptation Project. They've been tremendous partners for us in supporting the National People's Assembly. Just a word on the background image, which you can see here, which is from Sebastian Copeland. I think it's an almost visceral display of the impact of climate change on warming seas. The SOS, which you can see, is formed by a range of scientists working on Antarctica, and they're posing on top of a piece of ice which has recently broken off the continental ice shelf. So that's, I think, a very clear message of just what's happening and what we're confronting. So, as you can see, I've been tasked with delivering the report of the National People's Assembly, which was recently held as part of the Brisbane Festival, that focused on sea level rise and population displacement in the Asia-Pacific region. As we approach the pivotal COP15 in Copenhagen, it is no small coincidence that this project was based on a Danish model of deliberative democracy. We strictly adhered to the European model, which some of you may be familiar with, as well as replicating a highly successful and similar event in Australia that dealt with GM food technology and labelling. But in order to understand the reasoning behind our support for a citizens' jury on this significant issue, it is important to understand the sizable stakes that are at risk. So this is a bit of a hodgepodge of graphs, but a lot of the debate around climate change is focused on prevention, and well it should, because it is far better than the cure. But Green Cross Australia is also focused on the what-if scenario. So in this slide, you've got the top left graph, which demonstrates the increasingly variability in cyclone paths in Australia. Traditionally, they would follow a very common route along the northern end, but now they're sort of going everywhere and becoming more extreme in the process, which is demonstrated in the graph to the right there, which shows the rapid increase in extreme weather events. But it's the graph to the bottom left of the screen which I draw your attention to. In 2001, the IPCC predicted an annual sea level rise of less than 2 millimetres in the subsequent decade. However, they were wrong. In 2007, the IPCC corrected its error and reported that between 1993 and 2006, sea levels actually rose by 3.3 millimetres a year. This is right in the upper limits of the IPCC predictions, and if sea levels rise 1 metre in total, which at the present rate is sadly more than possible, we are experiencing, or could experience, up to 150 million people, or potentially more, having to move from their homes. As you can see, the bulk of them will be in Asia, or more or less in Australia's backyard. So, if this happens, what will we do? How will we confront the largest ever mass migration of humans? There is no international regime presently for persons displaced by climate change. So who will accommodate them? How will they get their new homes, and how will they get there? And as the most severely affected are quite likely to be amongst the poorest, who will pay? And how can we convince those in power that practical policy responses are needed now? Green Cross Australia has taken these challenges and placed them at the core of our campaign. In August of this year, we hosted the world's largest democracy deliberation on how Australia should respond to the humanitarian challenges of sea level rise in the Asia-Pacific. We supported this exercise in democracy because we felt when it comes to climate change, people are ahead of their governments. In our most recent election, the people of Australia, experiencing drought, loss of the Great Barrier Reef, and rising sea levels, knew that we could do better, and the politicians listened. The very first action of our new government was to ratify the Kyoto Protocol at COP13. But unless people can articulate their specific policies backed by expert information, we risk our government setting for populist publicity rather than pragmatic policy. So deliberative democracy was designed to remove this risk. As you can see, the model revolves around a panel of 14 citizens who are sitting in the centre of our circle there. Our jury members ranged from a 17-year-old high school student to a 60-year-old retired food engineer. 3 members were of Asian descent, and essentially the body was composed to represent the diversity of characteristics found within the wider Australian public. It was chaired by an ex-judge, and the jury were provided with evidence from a steering committee that compiled experts in the fields of environmental science, humanitarian and international law, security policy, and the all-important business and insurance sectors. So, to the outcomes of our panel. Ultimately, it formed a 27-page report, which is available for download, that was received by, and the report was handed on to the official climate change envoy of the Australian government, which is an important part of our process, Howard Bamsey. And we are seeking to have these outcomes incorporated into all future government policies relating to rising seas and climate-induced migration. So in this slide you can see the myriad of recommended areas that require a response to forced migration. The displayed recommendations have now become core principles of Green Cross Australia, and I probably don't have time to go in depth into all of these recommendations, but you can see we're now working across a broad range of fields, including better integration of emergency response teams to severe weather events, such as the Burmese cyclone, which you might remember. This is being achieved with the assistance of the Australian Defence Force personnel and a range of other special emergency services, including Red Cross International. In the business sector, we're working on optimising insurance schemes for the Pacific region for faster and essentially more appropriate payouts. They require specific mechanisms, and we're particularly applying this with regards to Tuvalu. So from the humanitarian outlook, it is necessary to also develop a greater regional dialogue for mass displacement, and this will be essential to meeting the migration challenge. And also we're working in terms of science with the Australian peak science and research body to further map the changes in coastline around Australia and also in Southeast Asia, so we can better understand the challenge that we're confronting. And to the side, finally, is a commitment to the Indigenous Australians living on a strip of islands called the Torres Strait. Generally, we're able to sort of push these ideas away from ourselves and think of them as being in faraway lands, but really this was designed to hammer home the fact that this is affecting our very own people in Australia. This is how significant the issue is. So I guess in summary, this exercise was designed to bring proposed solutions to climate change out into the public domain and thereby force our government's hand. And as you can find in the final report, while the people are inherently at the centre of the cause and consequences of climate change, we are hoping that it will also be the people who are the solution. So that's my slide presentation, and you can get involved and also download our report from greencrossaustralia.org. Thank you very much.